Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a safe place for leading with your heart. Hey, thanks for being here. You, Me, Empathy is the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective, a collaborative mental health community designed to empower each of us to grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional wayfinding. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No one is just a silly boy with a feely heart. You can support the show by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts, following us on social media at Yumi Empathy and Feely Human, and joining the Feely Human Collective community at feelyhuman.co. And now your host, Known Wells.
Hello, Feely Humans. Welcome to another episode of Yumi Empathy. My name is Known Wells. I'm the creator and host of this show. I'm also the founder of the Feely Human Collective, where we collectively grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional curiosity. I lead workshops on those topics for colleges, for schools, for businesses. If you're looking for something like that, reach out. Go to feelyhuman.co and contact me. We also do Feely hikes every month. The next one is later this month in LA. So if you're interested in that, go to feelyhuman.co. You can learn more about that. And I lead a regular monthly emotional check-in series. You can still join. We meet every month. You can learn more about that. Go to feelyhuman.co. Click the banner at the top. This episode is a wonderful episode. Really enjoyed this episode with Shanae, Honestly Nay Adams. Shanae and I talk about sexuality, sex positivity, and kink as an intervention for trauma. We also explore how the pandemic has impacted our relationship to our bodies, sexuality within the Black community. We talk about science fiction and social activism. We talk about Shanae's early experience and positive experiences learning about sex and the joy she gleaned in sharing that knowledge with others. We talk about Black representation in kink spaces, why kink is maybe not what you think it is. We talk about trust and consent and sexuality in the Black community and how historical abuse, racism, and the fetishization of Black bodies has led to an understandable mistrust and fear within the Black community. We talk about curiosity and being sex positive as a parent and what that looks like. Really, really loved this conversation. The audio quality is a little bit messy at times, but bear with me. It's just a wonderful conversation. Really, really enjoyed this conversation. Really appreciate and cherish Shanae. Honestly, Nay Adams. She's doing wonderful work in the world. And if you're Denver area, she leads workshops in person. She does virtual workshops and all sorts of wonderful sex education stuff. You can learn more about all of that at Honestly Nay. That's HONESTLYNAE.com. And definitely give Shanae a follow on Instagram, also at Honestly Nay. Okay. Before we get to the episode, one thing I wanted to share is Dan. Hi, Dan. Dan in the community reached out. He had a question that I wanted to reflect on. Dan asked, quote, "For those of us who carry trauma caused by other individuals and or institutions, examples, bullies, parents, structural oppression. What is your take on how we heal, be empathetic, move forward in this world where other people have harmed us?" So there's lots to unpack there. I would say, in my experience, one of the things that has helped me in experience some of that stuff, some of that bullying and parents not being the greatest, is to understand that what is a thing we have control over and what is a thing we don't have control over. I think also about one of the things that I'm starting to learn in sort of my empathy journey is to deepen the nuance and softness we have for people who have different experiences than me. So one example of this, not exactly of this, but I'll get to that in a second. But one example of like how I've maybe deepened my empathy for my parents or my dad, for instance, is to also understand that they've had different experiences, that they maybe grew up in a different environment that has, caused them to do certain things or to be a certain way or whatever, right? We all carry with us experiences, and, sometimes those experiences fully shape a person and there's no wiggle room or curiosity, and that happens too. And I think to understand that we all carry different things and to understand that those things shape us for the good and bad, for the neutral and all of the above is part of it. I think there is a lot of moving forward, and there is a lot of, I've had a lot of shame and a lot of grief sort of wrapped up in my own healing journey, and knowing that growing up, I considered myself a Christian, for example, right? And I no longer do. And what does that look like? And I think there's been some grief in that, right? Sort of moving on from an identity to something else, right? Is grief laden, and then figuring out what my relationship to my family looks like, and there's grief in that, and understanding what is crucial to my healing, what fills me up. Because ultimately, if our foundation is set, it's never set, but if we're doing the inner work, if we're sort of exploring what fills us up, if we're exploring our past experiences that inform who we are today, if we are creating space for nuance and curiosity and vulnerability in collective spaces, the deeper we learn and grow, and the deeper we can sort of connect and grow externally. And I think sometimes the people who have harmed us or hurt us maybe aren't doing that work, or maybe aren't reflecting in the world in that way. Sometimes that can happen, right? And sort of to move through the trauma, to process it, take safe spaces, take safe people. So who are those people? Identify who those people are. Brene Brown always says, not everyone has earned the right to hear your story, right? So find a therapist or find a pocket of people. It doesn't necessarily need to be a therapist, although I love therapy, but therapy is not always accessible, right? Therapy is not always going to work for everyone. So find safe people who you can be vulnerable with. Those people can reflect and be mirrors for you and your experience. And to know that you're not alone in that experience, to know that, whatever you went through, and I'm speaking to you, Dan, this process is not to censor it. It's not to erase it. It's to really deepen it and to understand it, and to know that things happen, and sometimes those things are hard and difficult and uncomfortable, and when you experience maybe bullying as a kid or trauma as a kid, it feels like a perversion of nature. It feels so wrong, right? And it's also a reality, and it's true, and it's not your fault, right? So know that you are innately worthy and innately worthy of love, and worthy of healing, and worthy of finding answers through this process, and know that it's non-linear, and know that it's messy, and know that it's scary and can be uncomfortable, but find those pockets of safety. Find the people who will listen and see you and be witness to your wholeness. And you have to do the same for yourself, right? So those are some thoughts. I hope that's helpful. I was kind of rambling, but I appreciate you, Dan, for writing in. And if you have a question, want to ask me, reach out. You can just email the show, youmeempathy@gmail.com. Make sure to follow the show on Instagram @youmeempathy. Follow the Feely Human Collective at Feely Human, and leave us some ratings wherever you listen to the podcast, Spotify or Apple or Stitcher, wherever. Please rate and review. It does help out the show. I appreciate you. Let's get into this episode with the wonderful Shanae, honestly Nay Adams, on sexuality, sex positivity, and kink as an intervention for trauma. Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective. On this show, we explore the struggles, the triumphs, the brights and the darks we face as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our mental health, our neuroses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being feely humans. You, Me, Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I'm honestly very honored to be here with sex educator and sex positive enthusiast who's eliminating the taboo around sex and sexuality. It's Shanae, honestly Nay Adams. Hello, Shanae.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. So grateful to have you. Really haven't explored sexuality on this show before. So I am really excited to get into it and learn more about you and the work that you do. Before we do that though, let's start with an emotional check-in. How are you feeling?
Oh gosh, how am I feeling? I'm tired. I am burnt out from the pandemic like a lot of us. I just got my booster shot, so I'm having a fun experience with that. But I am, here and present and maintaining my priority to stay active and mindful in my body.
Active and mindful in your body. What does that look like for you?
For sure. I think that I know something that I'm seeing with a lot of my clients as a mental health clinician, and something I acknowledge for myself, is that as we get overwhelmed, there's the desire to disassociate or to check out. And so I am actively trying to stay present in the moments where I can and prioritize rest. So that way I don't disassociate and check out in moments where, I rather would be here and being able to experience and have gratefulness for where I am right now.
I love that. I am personally in the process of a recent realization of mine, Shanae, is that I have a long history of disconnecting from my body. I have sort of this wellspring of ability to talk about feelings, but to describe them as they sort of feel in my body itself. I'm like baby steps. I'm on sort of ground level, foundation level with that, and it's scary, the body stuff. I'm still learning, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way, especially with quarantine. We didn't have access to all of those distractions. And so we were really kind of tasked to sit with ourselves and sit with our bodies and see what we can learn and experience. And if no one's taught you how to do that, if no one's supported you in doing that, it can be extremely overwhelming to attempt to check in and see not only what you're thinking, but what your body is feeling and experiencing.
Absolutely. And when there's, there's so much intersectional stuff at play when there's trauma or sort of history with body dysmorphia or eating disorders or childhood trauma, etc., like that can make things a little hairier.
For sure. But
Yeah.
what I think is important to especially remember, especially when we talk about like trauma or, the dysphoria in our bodies or withstanding some like traumatic events, sometimes that act of disconnecting is an act of protection because your body only ever wants to protect you. And so if
For
it
sure.
feels like something is too overwhelming or too big to manage, then, kind of numbing you out can be helpful to get through the moment. But if it becomes like a consistent thing, if you're constantly numbing out, if you don't have, a window of tolerance to really kind of process and be active in your body, then that's when it can be kind of detrimental.
Totally. Yeah, no, I've experienced that personally myself, and it's one of those things where the language I used was like, you've served me for a time, you helped me get through this experience of being a kiddo in an environment that didn't feel very safe, and now you're 40 and you're exploring what that means, and maybe you can let go of that, you can honor it, and then maybe let go and see if you can develop some tools that sort of serve you in deeper ways,
Yeah, it can absolutely be such a difficult moment of realization to think about the tools that you developed to survive and how they're not serving you when you move into a space of wanting to thrive. And so having to relearn and unpack that and learn new tools to be in the new space of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this, Shanae. What was your childhood like?
Yeah, my childhood was very chill. I grew up with both my parents in the house. I had an older sibling, but I was like he was like grown and like gone by the time I was able to do things. So I like to say I have the last child syndrome and I have only child syndrome. So like
Okay.
I don't share very well because I didn't have to. So that kind of thing. I think that I had a lot of time with myself. And so that gave me a lot of time to explore like my imagination and to do creative things. I would read a lot and be transported to these different worlds. And so it was just kind of, I think that it definitely set me up to be able to do all the things that I'm doing now, to use my imagination and to use kind of my own self-determination to get to the places where I want to be.
I love that. Interesting that you had this older sibling but they were out of the house and it felt like a solo adventure. What were some of those what were some of the books or sort of creative outlets or creative endeavors you did as a kid?
Sure. I used to read a lot of chapter books. I actually used to go through books like water. I would be able to consume like chapter books so fast. I read a lot of the American Girl stories. Addie's my favorite American Girl. So we would read a lot of her. And I didn't get into like the Harry Potter phenomenon. I met Charlie Bone, which was like a off-brand Harry Potter. So I would read about that. And I would read a lot of stories that focused on like Black girls and Black girl experiences. Like even my favorite bookstore was a Black-owned bookstore. So it was really exciting and empowering to go to places and buy, media that I saw myself in.
Oh yeah. I mean, representation is everything. And I know the stories that I read growing up, it was a lot of white heteronormative characters, with their dogs in things like The Call of the Wild or Where the Red Fern Grows. Those were my sort of touchstones as a kid.
Yeah, I definitely read those in school,
Sure.
but that wasn't what I was doing in my leisure time. And I remember like the titles of the books, but I'm blanking on like authors right now. But I did read a lot of fiction based in real life and real life experiences. A lot of like coming to age and like exploration, especially like a lot of like science fiction as well. So like the Binti trilogies or the Yeah, the Binti trilogies, like Octavia Butler was on my radar when I was younger too, and then a series of unfortunate events.
Sure.
That was my jam.
Those are great. Yeah, my partner Jessica, I think, has taught Octavia Butler in some of her college writing and sci-fi classrooms. It's been pretty cool to see her sort of show Octavia's worlds that are so, I mean, reading them now, I mean, I don't know, listeners, if you've read Octavia Butler, you should, but so very prescient and telling of what's happening in the world today, sadly.
Yes, absolutely. Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents are always like the books that I recommend folks get to know Octavia with. She also wrote Kindred, which I believe has been picked up to be a show. So I'm really excited to see that. And Fledgling is another work that a lot of people know her for. The Pattern Master trilogies, the Pattern Master series as well, is also really great. And like as I've been reading it now, one of my like activism professors had said that science fiction and social activism go hand in hand because as an activist, you're imagining, you know, this newer, different, better world. And so even engaging in what could be, you're engaging in science fiction. And so to like read her books now with that perspective is so, it's like mind blowing.
I love that. That's a really wonderful perspective. That makes so much sense. I love that. Yeah. So Shanae, growing up or maybe, you know, in young adulthood, did you have experiences with mental health? And like, what were those experiences, if so, and what did they mean to you?
Yeah, I think I experienced a lot of like standard adolescent. Do I fit in? Do I have friends? Do people like me? What do I want to do? What do I want to be? Who am I attracted to? I think that those were all a lot of questions that I really grappled with, and especially like navigating the inkling of a queer identity. I think that brought an additional, you know, spice to trying to navigate being an adolescent, because it's not until you are older, or at least for me, it wasn't until I was older and had language that it was a lot easier to kind of accept and understand what was going on. I do feel lucky that I have very like supportive peer group and a supportive group of friends that we could always be very open with each other with. And then I think for me, something that really like acted as a vehicle for me to grow where I was is that I had an interest in sex and sexuality young as well. You know, I discovered Talk Sex with Sue Johansson in high school. And so it was just really exciting just to be, you know, getting this information and then like thrilling to be able to go to school the next day and be like, yo, let me tell you what they learned. And so that really created like some identity formation that felt really good for me, because there was so much confidence, I feel like, that came out of having knowledge, and then so much joy that came out of, you know, giving that knowledge to others.
Wow. And how old were you when you sort of encountered some of that knowledge?
For sure. I think I must have been like a freshman in high school, like the summer of 8th grade.
Okay.
So what is that? Like 13, 14, like right there at the those real identity forming ages.
Yeah. Wow. And even at 13, you felt sort of safe and supportive in exploring that?
I did. You know, I always like to say that I think that as I look back on it now, my childhood was very sex positive. I remember that my mom bought me the All American Girls book, All About You. And it really kind of like explained like what was going to happen with your body and what might happen with your emotions and with your feelings. And so we read it together, and then she gave it to me. And I was able just to have it for myself. And I remember being like very, very excited about like the breast tracking chart where you could like track your breast development. So that was that was a thing. And then so like having that experience, finding Talk Sex with Sue Johansson, and even just like I think in finding like, you know, that sex positive education, and then going through sex ed at my high school, that just felt it was very overwhelming, and it was very very fear-based and very
Mm.
shame-based. And
Mm-hmm.
so to go to school and have that experience, and then to come home and watch Talk Sex and have that experience was like such an opportunity to compare and contrast and really have that juxtaposition.
Yeah. I mean, talk about opposing ideals or whatever, perspectives on sex. The perspective that I grew up with, Shanae, is probably that sort of more shame based. You know, I grew up in an environment, sort of evangelical Christianity, sort of perspective on sex, and where I felt like so much deep shame if I wanted to masturbate or things like that. Right, were just like so rife in my childhood, and I just to this day I think about it. I'm just like, God, if only like that. I mean, it's such a and that I mean that as you know, like as you know very well, like you're sort of dismantling some of that, some of those systems in the work that you do, but it's just that shame and guilt and toxicity that's wrapped up in sex and sexuality, from coming from so many different systemic places, is all over the place.
For sure. And, that's why I'm really passionate about sex positive parenting, because, children start learning when they're around 3. That's when they start being able to reason, and they start running experiments to kind of test how the world works. And so, I see clients now that have been raised with so much shame that now they're adults, and they don't feel safe in their bodies. They don't feel safe with their partners. They're wondering why they can't maintain a relationship. And so we're having to unpack 40 years of life experience to get back to that 3-year-old, that 5-year-old, and reestablish safety and prioritizing pleasure and consent in their experiences.
Yeah. How, like, so have we, I mean, sort of from a, maybe you don't know this, but like from a sort of public education perspective, like the stuff that we learn in schools, has that changed over the course of the last couple of decades? Have we gotten better societally, culturally?
I really want to say yes. And maybe there are some pockets of the world and some, containers where this is happening. I definitely know, like with me and my colleagues, we're holding those containers. But in general, we do so much education now about, what sex positivity is and what sex positive parenting is and how you set up, these tiny humans to be bigger humans. And so we're still running into a lot of those difficulties, a lot of that abstinence-based, fear-based, shame-based education. And so that's why it is really important to be on platforms such as yours or on the platforms that I hold as well. So that way we can get this information out there to try to, help that young person that's seeking this information that's being given kind of, that fear-based, shame-based stuff in their classes and in their classrooms. And we're even seeing, as we're having these platforms, we see things like Instagram and Facebook. They have banned hashtags like sexuality education or like sex positive or like pleasure based. So we are always, it feels like, fighting against this system that is like determined not to progress. And, that really speaks to the culture of America where, sex and sexuality is thought to be something that you don't discuss. It's something that you sweep underneath the rug, which is so contradictory to the fact that, as humans are sexual creatures, sexuality is a part of our experience. And attempting to act like this part of our experience is bad or act like, being sexual creatures is somehow bad creates those messages that can be really confusing for a young person trying to figure out and understand themselves and their identities.
Yeah, that's so well said, Shanae. Thank you for that. And there is such a clear parallel between, what you just said, the sexuality sort of piece, and then just mental health as a whole, right? Like there is a lot of just censoring and sort of maybe parents worrying about like, what can my kid understand? What can they contain? And there's a lot of denial of curiosity, that sort of natural curiosity that we have as humans to learn and grow and to bump into things and to learn as we go, right? But there is I've seen it. I'm not a parent, but I've seen it and been witness to it in my own life, is just such a worry that kids can't take it, right? A worry that like they're gonna, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's even something that I've heard in like schools that I've gone to and tried to pitch like sex positive, comprehensive sexuality education. They're like, well, if you teach the kids about sex, then they're going to go out and they're going to have sex. It's like, okay. And I always like the meme that I see where it's like, well, we taught the kids about World War II and now, little Billy's trying to conquer Germany. And it's like, so, like having information isn't scary. I think that sometimes because adults haven't, been taught how to do these things, to see it come up in their child, there's a lot of trauma that gets activated and gets triggered. And then they don't have the tools and the resources to navigate that. And so they pass that on to the child. And then it's like this kind of repetitive process.
Right. Yeah. For me, it ultimately comes down to, are we being open? Are we being curious? Are we asking questions? Are we like, there is this weird, I think it's very American, this weird sort of this perspective or lens with which we put on, or we just see things where we sort of value, like our elders. And there's a big cultural lens there too, but like we somehow have come to this idea or this conclusion that kids are kids and they don't understand, or they're not going to understand because they're kids and you have to listen to your parents. And I think there's certainly a lot of like nuance there, but I think that lens gets us into a lot of trouble, and especially when it comes to mental health or sexuality or these things that we all have. Like these are our bodies. This is the thing that we are. We are humans. We have sexuality. We have mental health. Yeah. I don't know. It's messy. It's scary. It's messy and uncomfortable. Yeah.
And young people understand far more than we give them credit for. And that understanding in itself is scary. And what I think is really interesting is young people, they have the capacity and the awareness to be like, something is off and something is wrong. And if they don't have someone who comes in and normalizes that and gives them the tools for that, that's how we grow up and we start to, feel shame or want to push things away or can't sit and navigate things. And then that goes back to the, if nobody taught the parent, then the parent can't teach the child. And the child grows up to be a parent, and that parent can't teach their child. And so we get into this very repetitive, destructive cycle that really starts to diminish a young person's capacity. I know that my partner works in an organization where they focus on youth and adult partnerships. And so they teach young people they teach them leadership skills and how to speak and how to advocate for themselves and how to ask for the things that they want. And so that self-advocacy in, social justice areas translates over to personal boundaries, translates over to how you show up in relationships, translates over to how one day you'll navigate the relationship with your employer. And so all of this stuff is so foundational to helping us be able to, actualize realities that are really serving for us. But it is a scary concept if you've never seen it, or if you do see it and it feels intimidating, to be able to kind of pass those things on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's well said. Tell me a little bit about too, there is so much intersectionality here when it comes to sexuality. I'm curious from your perspective, what is the sort of experience, or maybe just your experience as sort of a Black human, a Black person, a person of color in the space of sexuality? Is there something, specific to the Black community and sexuality that is a hang up, a taboo, a cultural sort of trapping that I, as a white person, am not aware of, would love to learn more of? Is there something there? I know that, that's something that you focus on in your in your work as a sex educator?
For sure. I think maybe one of the biggest or first things that I see when it comes to sex and sexuality in the Black community is that there's so much mistrust. There's so
Mm,
much fear of information just because of, our history and our experience with the medical profession, our history and our experience navigating systems of oppression and injustice.
yeah.
There's so much mistrust when information does come out. Another thing I really see in the Black community is it's still very faith-based. And so, with religion can sometimes come shame and sometimes come, the idea that anything that is rooted in pleasure is somehow rooted in the devil or in something negative. And
Mm,
so I definitely know that that's something that I definitely have seen. I have one of my friends is a Christian sexologist. And so she, does her best to dismantle all of those things and how pleasure shows up in the Bible. And maybe another thing I know for me in particular is a lot of my education and work that I do is on indigenous forms of healing and using kink as a form of trauma, as an intervention for trauma.
mm,
But when you look at, if you get on Google right now and you Google kink, the first thing that might come up is 50 Shades of Grey. And then it's also going to be followed by lots of white bodies, lots of able bodied, lots of small bodies.
yeah.
And so that paints the idea that there is no space for Black people, for POC, for feminine people who want to be dominant or masculine people who want to be submissive. It kind of
Mm,
paints that idea that there is not a space for you within this space. And so I think that I know for me that sometimes I do feel very ostracized in the places that I go. Sometimes when I go to workshops or I go to learning opportunities, when I go and do mental health, like credit earning things, I'm oftentimes the only Black person in the room. And so it can just be very irritating.
mm, yeah.
And that acts as a barrier to getting the information that might, help you live a healthier and more well-rounded life and have a better experience.
When you say, and when I have said sex positivity, how do you define that, Shanae? Like, what does that word sex positivity mean to you?
For sure. So sex positivity, I break down into 3 pillars, and these 3 pillars really inform the workshops that I create, how I move through the world, how I show up as a therapist, how I show up in community. And so the first pillar of sex positivity for me is the fact that humans are sexual creatures. And so by default, anything that we do sexual related is not wrong. It is all right. It is all normal. It is all a part of the human experience.
Mm,
The second pillar of sex positivity is that everyone has sexual experiences. We're in, we all have a sexuality. We all have some perspective. We have a lens that we view our sexuality through. And all of us do that, regardless of our orientation, regardless of our attraction, regardless of our romantic leanings. And that third pillar is that not all of those experiences are positive. And so when we're approaching these topics or having these conversations, I always want to keep that in the back of my mind. I don't know what experiences are in the room with me, but there are very high chances that some of these experiences are not positive. And so there can be a lot of things that people are holding and grappling with. And so that's why it's really important that we approach each other as humans with empathy and with the fact that all of our experiences are unique and valid and true, and that we don't have to prove our experiences to anybody.
mm. Do you, growing up and sort of having this early sort of basis and education and knowledge in sexuality, how did you experience some of that initially, some of that sex positivity for yourself personally as a young woman, young whippersnapper?
I think that it really kind of started with me telling myself that what I was feeling was okay. And me telling myself that, these feelings that I was grappling with, the identities that I was grappling with, at sometimes I would do the thing that was easy. So like dating boys was easy, and because girls were scary. And so having to cut myself some slack for engaging in those things, and being aware of what was going on. And also there can sometimes be, an aspect of safety. And so having to like give myself that grace in the sense that, you're trying to keep yourself safe. I can't fault you for trying to keep yourself safe. I think that hindsight is so 2020. I don't know if teenage Shanae would have had this. Well, I know that they definitely didn't have this language. And so it's so interesting to like look back on experience with this language to really see that even though maybe I didn't have, this very clear reasoning and understanding as to why I was moving the way that I moved, I still knew that, I was doing the best that I could at the time, and I was letting that be okay. That's the only thing that I can ask for myself is to do the best that you can at the time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so you have this knowledge, growing up, and then eventually you become a sexual health advocate in college. Tell me about that experience.
Sure. So when I got to the University of Missouri, I was looking for a community and for things to group and for things to do. And there was a human sexuality class that I was interested in taking. And it turns out that if you take this class and you fill out an application, here's my work from home experience too. If you take the class and you fill out the application, you can join this organization that goes out and teaches workshops all over campus. And so I had only ever seen, sexuality as a job from Sue Johansson. And so here I am at college, and Heather McPherson is the director of the SHAPE program. And I was like, well, dang, like I can actually do this. Like I gotta be Heather when I grow up. Right? I don't want like her job. And so I always say that it was very much a trial by fire because I was teaching my peers. I was teaching my friends. I was teaching, the people that I was confiding in who were snarky and wanted to pick at me and wanted to, act like college kids. And so that trial by fire really helped me feel more confident and comfortable in those spaces. Because if I can, navigate whatever my friends are throwing at me, I can navigate, what a random person might throw at me and what the random experience might be. And I feel like SHAPE advocates at Mizzou were so like revered. We would wear these polos and everybody would know that, the SHAPE advocates are safe people to talk to. The SHAPE advocates are people that you can go and not feel judged by. And they would be, open within some limits, open to sitting with you and hearing what you had to say and kind of like holding that space for you.
Wow. What trial by fire, you said. What an amazing experience. It had to have been hard and so, sounds so very rewarding.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was hard because I liked it so much and I had so much fun and I was really good at it to the point where like, we would be in our staff meetings and they'd be like, well, this organization has requested Shanae and that organization has requested Shanae. Shanae can't do all the things. Shanae is not the only one in the organization. And so it also taught, teamwork. It taught me how to collaborate with others. It taught me how to, formulate an idea and then execute the steps to bring that idea to fruition. And so not only has that helped me, as a sexuality educator, but it got me through undergrad. It got me through grad school. It's getting me through this doctoral program. It's definitely a tool that I continue to use in all the areas of my life.
That's so cool. I love that. And I love that you were looked at as a safe place. Like that is so crucial, especially to like 19, 20, 21-year-olds, college kids. Like college can be such a scary, uncomfortable, just eye-opening place, and to have a space in you and the sort of the groups that you're forming, that safe space, it's beautiful. It's so, I would have loved to have that. It's wonderful.
Now it's like every university that asks me to come teach, I'm like, do you do peer education? Like, where's that office at?
Yeah. So that would be like you coming to a college and teaching others how to do what you did in college.
Yeah, teaching them how to give workshops and answer questions and like hold and prioritize space. Because again, like 19, 20, 21, that's another transitionary period where you're, you kind of go through high school thinking you know who you are, and then you get to college and you're like, wait, now you're this like small fish in this big pond, and you have to kind of start that over again when you get out of college. And you do it again. You're another small fish in a bigger pond. And so, having someone that can support you through that growth can definitely be life changing for people.
So many ponds. Yeah. I love it. Tell me a little bit about, I'm very interested in sex and empathy and how those two play a role, if they do. I'm curious from your perspective how they intersect.
For sure. I think maybe some of the main places where we see sex and empathy interact is if we are, holding space or being in relationship with partners who have experienced trauma, or holding space and in relationship with people who are differently abled, or who are experiencing difficulty in their bodies. Empathy, I feel like empathy doesn't come up in times of joy when we're celebrating. Empathy occurs when, we're having a negative experience and when we need someone to hold that space for us sometimes. So I definitely think, if you're navigating a relationship with a person who's experienced trauma, or if you're in a relationship with someone differently abled, or if you're in a relationship with someone whose body won't do the things that they want it to do, whatever that looks like or whatever that means, that's really in those spaces where I know for my clients that we really work on building empathy, even being in relationship, in being in relationship with someone else and, valuing them and giving thought and consideration to their needs while also, prioritizing yours and your journey.
Yeah, I love that. It's really looking at the whole person, right? The whole of their experiences and what they bring.
Yeah, all of trying to view their experience through the lenses of their identity.
Yeah. I know that I mentioned before sort of my upbringing and what sexuality was for me. And it was just a lot of repression. And because of that experience and those experiences, I, didn't have a lot of sexual experiences early on in my life, not until I was into my 20s. And even then it was just it was all very connected to like my trauma response, which was to shut down and be quiet and to sort of guard myself. So there was a lot of uncomfortable experiences because of that. But when I met Jessica, my partner, and we've been together for 14 years or so, I think we've grown a lot sexually. I think early on she had to show up for me in ways that were mindful of those experiences of mine, and she had to be patient, and she had to ask questions, and she had to give me space and time to kind of reflect. And it was like, looking back on it now, it's such a beautiful, safe, empathetic space that she gave me in those sexual experiences early on in our relationship.
And so, as the person who has shown up like Jessica has for you, it can be really, at times frustrating to be like, why isn't this going the way that my other experiences are going? Or,
sure.
Why can't this person be a person who doesn't have this baggage and this background? And I think that that's really where you start to see, the couples that are going to the couples and the relationship setups that are going to make it. And by make it, I don't mean like last, but like to have some kind of positive learning impact in those relationships that aren't are going to kind of tack on to the negative experiences that the other partner has felt. And so it does take, I know for me, I do a lot of, having to step back and having to breathe and process and kind of being there and being that support, seeking my own lanes of support whilst being a supporter, and it takes a person that has awareness and desire and drive to do that, because again, it's not something that everyone learns how to do.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. I'd imagine, maybe this is a question I have for you, Shanae, is have you experienced in your life relationships where a partner has sort of shown up and felt maybe what's the word? intimidated by sort of the way that you hold yourself sexually and in this beautiful, sort of positive, empowered way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think especially, when I've gone to conferences or when I've met people, I feel like, I guess there's like no way to say this without it being like a humble brag, but a lot of the times where I go places, like people who are interested in me know who I am and they know what I do and they know what my background and my experiences. And so I definitely think that it can be very intimidating. I don't think I'm intimidating at all. I think that I do a very good job of separating like myself from my brand and my persona and the output that people see when they think of me. Because 90% of the time I'm at home in my Savage onesie, like drinking juice. Like that is like I am such a homebody. I be at the house.
Yeah.
But then I do come and I'm very passionate about, what I'm learning and what I'm teaching and what the value of it is. And I think that sometimes that passion is both exciting and intimidating. And so, I think it is possible that it is maybe stopped some people who might have been interested in me from pursuing me. I know my partner now, was so intimidated. They didn't talk to me for 2 years before we started our relationship. So it's kind of like you live and you learn and you kind of just go with the punches. But like if you ask my partner now, had they have known who I was and how I was now when they were crushing and intimidated by me, they would have told themselves that there's nothing to be intimidated of. Yeah. Because Shanae's at the house, not doing anything.
Totally. And I get that. It kind of makes me think about the sci-fi sort of what could be conversation we had earlier, which is like, I'm showing up, like, let me just use my example. I'm showing up in relationship with Jessica, and I'm showing up with all of this, all this baggage and trappings and experiences that I've had sexually that have felt maybe not true to myself, and I have to sort of reckon with. There's a lot of growth I need to do sexually for myself, and then I'm showing up in relationship with Jessica, who's had more sort of sexual experience than I've had, and coming into that, and then there's the lens of like dumb sort of toxic masculinity lens of that, which can sort of inhibit sort of growth in areas. But I'm coming to that relationship, and I have to face the fact that, she's had more experience, and I have to sort of recognize that there is space for me to grow. And but that space is what could be, right? That's the sci-fi piece. The what could be is exciting and beautiful, and where we need to go sexually as human creatures, right? So it's all exciting.
Yeah. And I always like to tell people, like, you are only limited by your creativity. And because the human brain loves novelty, we love new things, we love new experiences, we love going new places, so you have to have some curiosity and some openness to maintain that novelty within your relationship. And just to touch on kind of, I know that you mentioned that there might be some feelings of like being the masculine one, and society says that, the masculine one is the leader and they're supposed to have the knowledge. And so having to like grapple with maybe a feeling of like inadequateness and having to find the language to, well, actually, it's like first having the realization of like, I feel inadequate. And then you get to ask yourself the question of like, so do I just hold on to this and let it build and let it become toxic in me? Or do I communicate this and I make it an opportunity for, our relationship to grow? I see a lot in some of the couples that I work with that there's so much unsaid for fear of what might happen if I say it. Yep. But the thing about relationships is that relationships grow through conflict. You have to have conflict in order to grow and progress. And the more that you navigate conflict, the more that you find closeness, the more that you find empathy for each other, the more that you find humanity. And when you hold on to those things, we build resentment, we build disappointment, we build intolerance. And so conflict isn't something to be afraid of and to run away from. It's something to run forward with each other, have it be us together versus the problem, as opposed to, this being something that I have to solve on my own.
Absolutely. So beautifully said. And there's to use that as an example, there is like the sort of the masculine piece that I mentioned. There is there is the sort of intellectual awareness, right? And then there's also the body awareness, and like those two things need to reconcile. Those two things need to be explored and be sort of mined for sort of the barriers that they may be causing or the obstacles that they may be putting in your way toward that conflict or toward that conversation, that openness that you should have with a partner.
Absolutely. And that openness really starts with like the openness of self. I think one of the things that we experience in the West and in Western society is that we have been trained so much to move away from our bodies. Mm-hmm. We've been trained not to see the value of our bodies and the value of those gut feelings and the value of, our intuition. We've moved from, a kind of like indigenous form of living and being aware and being active and being connected to the earth or to the universe or to, whomever gives you that strength in a sense. And so, especially when it comes to navigating sex and navigating pleasure, having that disconnect from your body disconnects you from your pleasure, disconnects you from the potentiality of experiences that you could have. And then all you're left with to feel that space of opportunity is that space of resentment, is that weight or that guilt or that shame or that, somehow thinking that I am a horrible person because I feel this way. When in actuality, you are not the first or the last human to feel this way. Potentially speaking, your partner feels this way too, but y'all aren't communicating to be able to come together to be us versus the problem.
Yes. So well said. So you mentioned novelty earlier, Shanae. Tell me, I am wholly clueless when it comes to the world of kink. So tell me a little bit about sort of your experience with kink and how that, maybe can help a relationship or sort of foster some of this creativity and openness and novelty that is crucial, I think, in curiosity and empathy and growth.
For sure. So I think when it comes to kink, the first thing that we have to do is we have to move off of the examples that we have in the media, because all we ever see is the activities. But the thing about kink is that there's so much conversation, so much trust, so much consent that's happening before we even get to these activities. And so because you have already established a relationship with trust, with communication, with consent, those are the things that you need before you attempt to do anything kinky. Sometimes people like to say that the opposite of kink is vanilla, which basically like kink is thought to be like if you're approaching and engaging in sex and sexuality in a non-traditional way, and vanilla is the traditional way. Yeah. And so people like to say that, if you're vanilla, that's somehow bad or that's somehow wrong. But I think that vanilla I don't think vanilla exists. I think everybody's kinky if you look at it, right? But B, vanilla gets a really bad rap because if you think about like ice cream, you think about the ice cream that you put toppings and stuff in, like Rocky Road or cookies and cream. You need really good, tasty, solid vanilla ice cream before you add anything in it. Or else you're just left with ice cream that tastes like crap and got a bunch of crap in it. And so some of the things that we see in vanilla is, I would expect you to be able to talk to each other. I would expect you to have an understanding of your own pleasure. I would expect you to have a relationship that is built on trust and on consent. And so you need that good, tasty vanilla base before you throw in all those kinky cookies to make it be a really tasty experience for everyone.
I love that. So it really starts with that foundational self-knowing and self-exploration that has to happen before the outward, the external stuff.
Absolutely. And in knowing yourself and giving your partner the chance to know themselves, that's how you start to build trust, to start to engage in some of those activities together, to start to explore, what else can we experience as a unit. But if you don't have that trust, if you don't have that consent, then you're kind of setting yourself up for violence in a way. Because I hear a lot, especially when I teach kink workshops, that kink looks a lot like violence. And that's true. It can. But the difference between violence and kink is the consent and the trust building piece, all the checks and the balances, all of the education that you should have in the activities that you're doing before you engage in it.
Yeah. Is that would you say that self-awareness piece is sort of the biggest obstacle for people to sort of explore that world? To explore kink specifically?
I don't think that it's the self-awareness piece per se. I think oftentimes, especially for Black people and Black women in particular, is the fact that we don't see ourselves in those spaces. And so it becomes the idea that that space is not for us, or it's not safe for us, or there's a lack of understanding as to why people engage in these activities and what the benefit is, and even how to engage in those things. And so, especially for, POC, it can be really hard to find kinky communities of color. And it can be really uncomfortable to attempt to immerse yourself in white kink communities because, again, you're dealing with all of that, the microaggressions, the institutionalized racism, the fetishism, the objectification. And so, if that is your first experience stepping into this space, then it absolutely makes sense why you think this isn't for you and why it's not something that you want to ever experience again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes so much sense to me. Now, since you've started sort of teaching and leading workshops on kink and sexuality, have you seen more representation?
I am very committed to building kink community. So I see growth because I work for the growth. Yeah. I think that it is too much of a task to ask for these things to happen organically if I'm not putting myself in a space to be an example. Right. So I see growth because I work hard for that growth.
And you're based in Denver area, is that right?
Yep, I'm based in Denver. Before Panorama happened, I would be traveling about 2 weeks a month, though. And so I really got the opportunity to connect with and touch a lot of people all over the States. But now all of the contact that I have is through the Zooms here in Colorado.
How has that been over Zoom?
I have always done like virtual education. So when we had to go virtual, it wasn't a big adjustment or change for me. Like even when I was getting my master's degree in clinical counseling, I had made the decision that I wanted to do, that I wanted my practice to be virtual because I am busy jet setting all over the world. And so asking myself to, come into an office so many days a week just felt like too hard of an ask for me. So my plan was always to go virtual. And I just think that the pandemic kind of maybe it sped it up in a way, but I think that it definitely normalized the fact that you can do, therapy and education through the internet. I think maybe before the pandemic happened, people were more committed to in person. And I think that there is something, unique and different that you get to experience in person. But I think that I definitely think that it is a skill. But I think that if you have that skill, I feel like none of my participants have missed out on anything from, getting this information or having therapy with me virtually.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit about like some of your favorite types of workshops to lead and who are your audience? I mean, is it typically colleges or is it like private groups or businesses, things like that?
I will teach wherever someone will let me come teach. So I have lectured at universities. I've hosted like immersive 8-hour-long conferences or workshops at universities. I've taught at community resource centers. I've taught at high schools, middle schools. I do sex ed for kindergartners. Wow. I will go where asked. And I also, try to prioritize doing my own education on my own platform and try to come up with at least one class from me every month. So that way I can help people maintain kind of their education. And then I am the co-founder of a community resource center called the Chrysalis House, where we focus on serving QT BIPOC folks and sex workers. And we support the lobbying of the decriminalization of sex work. And so through that, we host a monthly munch where kinky and kink interested people are able to come together in a non-sexual place. And we can have conversations about different kink topics and about, what our experiences are. And while we prioritize the experiences of POC, we do welcome anyone, but we do have, some rules to help everybody feel safe and feel heard in this space.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I just want to take a moment and just tell the listeners, if you're listening now and you're someone who would like to learn more about this stuff, get in touch with your sexuality more, or maybe you work at a college or someplace where you could benefit from this. Maybe you have kids who could benefit from this. Please get in touch with Shanae. I'll make sure all the links are in the show notes for this episode. Shanae, it's just such important work. It's such foundational human work, and I'm just so grateful that you're doing it.
Absolutely. I am super community minded and community focused, because community is the cure for everything, for depression, anxiety, for overwhelm. Turn to community and you'll get through it. And so I just really try to make sure I do my part to help support and grow my communities.
Yes, you hear that? It's community, not this individual personal responsibility nonsense, I guess. Maybe that's sort of rampant in the world. It's community. Yeah, it's collective.
It's how we've been raised in the West, is to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And we can't. Us as humans don't do well in isolation. And I think a lot of people have learned that in quarantine. We don't do well by ourselves. We're social creatures. And we've seen that even from, people who have been in solitary confinement. Bad things happen when we're left by ourselves. We need community. We need to be around other people who feel us and who feed us and who see us. And if we don't, then we lose ourselves.
Damn right. Yeah, absolutely. Shanae, let's talk about empathy heroes. So we always sort of wrap up the show talking about people in our lives, or even characters from your favorite sci-fi novels. Just people who are empathetic, compassionate, caring humans. I'll go first and name my empathy heroes this week. So my empathy heroes this week are two pals, Lisa Congdon and Emily McDowell, who recently created the Long Table Foundation, which provides mentoring and grants for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian artists and creatives. Really cool foundation. They're providing, like I said, mentoring and grants. And it's just a cool thing that they just announced this week. So I wanted to shout them out. You can go to longtablefoundation.org to learn more about that. And just wanted to shout out Lisa and Emily for doing that. So how about you, Shanae? Who is your empathy hero this week?
My empathy heroes this week are... I am a huge Marvel fan. Spider-Man is my favorite superhero. And I've seen No Way Home like 2-3 times already.
Wow.
And so my empathy heroes this week are Peter 2 and Peter 3, which are Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. And just the empathy that they have for Tom Holland's Peter Parker as he goes through the pinnacle experience that Spider-Man has to go through that really helps him become Spider-Man, which is like the I don't want any spoilers. So he goes through, the pinnacle experience that Spider-Man needs to go through. And so Toby's Peter and Andrew's Peter do such a great job of just like showing up for him and being there for him and supporting him as he goes through the same journey that they've already been through. And they try to help him. They try to, hold him as he experiences that blow. And so I really appreciate it, just like, seeing all of my faves in my favorite universe come together with such empathy.
That's such a great one. We just watched that, I guess it was last week, and it's fantastic. And that the whole sort of, and I guess this is a spoiler, so I'll make sure to call out spoiler in the show notes or whatever. But yeah, the whole interplay between the three of them was probably my favorite part of the whole movie.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I love seeing all my favorite Sony Peter Parker villains, like the Green Goblin. I love him. Yeah. So it was just cool to see everybody come back. And then, that is the part of being a superhero, is that you do have to experience great loss. And so some superheroes that oftentimes end up being villains experience that loss by themselves, and then they become hard. They become, violent, which Tom Holland's Peter Parker could have done without that support. And if it wasn't for Toby and Andrew he might have become the villain, and they really held that space for him and helped him become the best Spider-Man that he could be in his universe.
Yeah. I love that. It's fantastic. I want to see it again.
It's great. I'm going to see it again.
It is great. It is great. Well, Shanae, where can the Feely Humans out there connect with you and learn more about the amazing work that you're doing in the world?
Absolutely. So the best place to find me is on the social medias, particularly Instagram. It's at Honestly Nae, Nae. And that's where I do my best. I do my best to post and to do the things. And outside of there is my website, honestlynae.com. I highly recommend that you sign up for my newsletter, because the only reason why I'm organized is my dope assistant, and they make sure that the newsletter goes out. So that's one of the best ways to make sure that you know where I'm teaching and what I'm teaching and what I'm up to. And if outside gets safe, where I'll be traveling and where I'll be. And if you ever have any questions or concerns, or you're interested in kind of exploring some of those own capacities for sex and sexuality, if you're in the state of Colorado, we can do some therapy work. If you're outside the state of Colorado, we can do some sexuality coaching to really help you kind of come into yourself.
Amazing. Well, all of those links will be in the show notes, listeners. And yes, shout out to Artsy, Shanae's assistant, dope assistant.
Yes.
Yes. And well, thank you, Shanae. This was fantastic. Thank you for being present and open with me. And I appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, as always. Thank you so much. And listeners, what I say at the end is this. I'm here, you're here. We're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.